July 9th, 1892. Dear Martha, last night while I was in the tub, I could hear Miss Melman talking to Daniel. She said, "I'm happy you came here, Daniel. I'm glad Theodosia has a cousin like you. It's good to have family." He said, "I'm glad I have a cousin like her. I thought I was all alone, but now I can read and write some." By the time I dried off and changed into the clothes Miss Melman had gathered for me, Daniel was sitting beside her, reading aloud. I listened at the door, unseen. He read, "Teddy and I poled and rowed the boat up the river. We camped on the river bank." She said, "Just like Tom and Huck." Daniel said, "That's what Teddy said." "Who are Tom and Huck again?" Miss Melman laughed. "They're two kids from the book Tom Sawyer. I was reading it to the kids on the wagon train." Hearing her say that reminded me how much I miss our wagon train school. That evening, as the sun was going down, we walked along the seashore and picked up shells. It's hard to imagine that this is the same ocean we saw on the 4th of July in Jacksonville. We found lots of colorful shells. Did you know that tiny little sea creatures used to live in the shells? We found starfish, sand dollars, even coral. Daniel found some colorful frosty pieces that weren't shells. Miss Melman said, "That's sea glass." "See?" "Hold it up to the light." Unfortunately, some people throw bottles into the ocean. Those bottles can be a real danger because they almost always end up getting broken. The sea tosses the bits of broken glass to and fro in the waves and on the sand. After a while, it smooths the edges and frosts up so that it no longer looks like glass. Daniel said, "They're pretty. Would you like to have them?" Miss Melman said, "I'll add them to my collection of sea glass. Thank you, Daniel." Yesterday, we went to the fort of St. Augustine. Miss Melman's friend, Mr. John Mickelson, took us and was our tour guide. Miss Melman said, "I've just moved here, remember?" Mr. Mickelson knows all about the fort, and he was kind enough to agree to take us on a tour. Mr. Mickelson is handsome. He's tall, dark hair, big brown eyes. He showed us all around the fort. He said, "Teddy, did you know that St. Augustine is the oldest continuously occupied European established city in the United States?" I said, "Yes, I did." "Wasn't it built by the Spanish?" He said, "Yes, in 1565, the architecture is called Spanish colonial." We walked to the Castillo de San Marcos, an enormous Spanish star fort. Mr. Melkerson pointed out to the walls and said, "Look carefully at this material." We ran our hands over the stones. Daniel said, "It looks like shells are in it." Mr. Melkerson said, "That's right. This is called coquina. It's kind of like limestone, but it's made up of ancient shells that have been bonded together. Coquina is rather soft when it comes to building materials, so the enemy's cannonballs would embed themselves in the wall rather than punching holes through the wall. The star shape of the fort also helped protect them from cannon fire. We also visited the oldest wooden schoolhouse built sometime before 1716. Mr. Milkinson said, "Kids, I'd like you to see Miss Melman's first school." Miss Melman said, "Tee-hee, very funny. Are you trying to say I'm an old maid?" Mr. Milkinson said, "On the contrary. Miss Casey Melman, I might be trying to say you found the fountain of youth." Martha, I think they were flirting. Tomorrow we're going swimming in the Atlantic Ocean. Love, Teddy. July 10th, 1892. Dear Martha, trouble seems to find me no matter where I hide. Today Miss Melman took Daniel and me swimming in the Atlantic Ocean. Right near the water's edge were tiny little houses called cabanas made of cloth. You rent a cabana for the day for a quarter, and that's where you change into your bathing costume. Daniel and I don't own bathing costumes, so Miss Melman borrowed some for us. We rented a bright red striped cabana and took turns changing. When it was my turn, I took off my neck pouch and hid it under my clothes. I'd almost forgotten that I was wearing it, but I'm glad I remembered because it has Pa's land deed and his father's watch in it. I think seawater would have ruined them for sure. I opened the pouch to make sure everything was there. The land deed, the silver dollar given to me by John Philip Sosa, and Pap's watch that was given to me by his father. For some reason, I opened the watch. On the inside was a picture of Pap's mother, Isabel, and an inscription. It said, To my beloved Dalton, I love you more than the stars are bright, more than the moon is round, more than the ocean is deep. Isabel. I realized for the first time that Pap's mother must have given the watch to Pap's father. It would have been a long time ago, maybe 30 years, maybe around the time Althea Tomlinson's husband would have given her the gold bracelet. That reminded me. I took off the gold bracelet so I could put it in the pouch with my other treasures. I held it in my fingertips. I had found the bracelet in the springs. It was a treasure. It showed me how, when I search for something and don't give up, I might come across something good. I thought about Althea Tomlinson. It had been her treasure too. But I didn't want to think about that, so I dropped the bracelet in the neck pouch, pulled the strings tight, and hid the pouch under my clothes again. Swimming in the Atlantic Ocean was incredible fun. The beach was filled with people, all having a good time. We looked stylish in our swimming costumes, and I felt proud about that because that's what just about everyone wore. Miss Melman showed us how to jump up high, get on top of a wave, and ride in it, all the way to the shore. When we were hungry, we bought hot dogs and lemonade. A man and woman were making saltwater taffy to sell. They made the candy in an enormous copper kettle. After they let it cool for a bit, they gathered it all up together on a marble slab and began pulling it back and forth with their hands. The brownish candy began to get lighter and lighter. When they got finished, it was completely white. That's when they added colorings and stripes. They finally cut it and wrapped it into pieces in wax paper. The whole process was fascinating. I wish I had that job. When we got back to the cabana late in the afternoon, we changed and put on our regular clothes. We were tired, a little sunburned, but very happy. When Miss Melman went to tip the cabana porter, he said, "Did your husband get his things too?" Miss Melman smiled and said, "You must have me mixed up with someone else." The porter said, "No, ma'am, I don't think so. Didn't you and the children have the last cabana there, the red one? Well, your husband came earlier and asked if he could change too. He pointed to the kids on the beach and said you were his family." We looked at each other, puzzled. Was someone playing a trick? Miss Melman said, "Excuse me, sir. What did this man look like?" He said, "I didn't pay much attention to his looks. He was in a hurry. Oh, I do remember a scar he had right here." He pointed to the area between his eyebrow and his ear. At the word scar, my hands flew to the pouch around my neck. I loosened the strings and looked inside. The land deed was missing. Oh, Martha, what a disaster. Love, Teddy. July 11th, 1892. Dear Martha, I know my letters seem filled with ups and downs, but I want you to know what's going on. The land deed is gone, and there is no use in wondering who took it. The only person who could have stolen is Jimbo Dudd. Just the thought of that man makes my skin crawl. Miss Melman questioned the cabana porter. Jimbo had shown up at the beach, and he stood in the shade searching for us. When he finally found us, he came to see the cabana porter. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 hours before we discovered it was gone. Felt like crying. Daniel said, "We're going to get it back, Teddy. I promise you that." Miss Melman found a policeman and reported the theft. Then she said, "We need a plan. But first, we need full bellies. You can't think as well on an empty stomach." It was true. We were hungrier than an army. When we got back to her cottage, I volunteered Daniel and me to make supper while Miss Melman went to get Mr. Milkison. "He'll know what to do," she said. After supper, we had a meeting. Mr. Milkison said, "Teddy, this is a terrible thing that has happened. But if it got me an invitation to supper, it might not be all that bad. Thank you and Daniel for a delicious meal. Mr. Milkison has a gift for looking on the bright side." Miss Melman said, "Teddy's mama taught her to cook. She's the woman I told you about, John, the woman who taught me to cook." Miss Melman called him John, not Mr. Milkison, but John. John. Mr. Milkison said, "Where do you think this Jimbo Dudd'll go, Teddy?" I said, "He wants the land deed so he can claim Pap's land as his own. I heard him discussing it with his wife, Verna." Daniel said, "She's one disgusting excuse for a woman, let me tell you. She's a worthless piece of shingle rot that would steal your clothes and try to sell them back to you." Mr. Milkison smiled. "So you're saying you're not too fond of her, Daniel?" Daniel smiled back. "She's a nasty-tempered, kid-whipping, tobacco-spitting scallywag is what she is, and her cooking's even worse." We laughed. Mr. Milkison said, "Well put, Daniel. You do have a way with words." I said, "Jimbo and Verna talked about going to file a land deed. They said no one would know that Jimbo is not my pap, Dalton Bodain." Miss Melman said, That would have to be in Dade County. That's where the deed states your father's land is located. I'm so glad you let me have a look at it. Mr. Milkison said, the county seat of Dade County is Juneau. They moved it in '88. I said, then that's where I'll have to go. I don't know where Pap and Mom are. They may already be down there. Or they may be back up in Gainesville, in who knows what quarantine station. Or they may be... I didn't want to say the word dead out loud. But if Jimbo's going down to Juneau to try to file the deed, then I've got to go there and tell these people that is Dalton Bodain. Miss Mellon said, Teddy, could you wait till the 1st of August? I could go with you then. Mr. Milkinson said, and I have to leave on business to Tallahassee tomorrow morning. If you could wait until the end of the next week, I can go with you. I said, thanks for your offers, but I can't wait. Miss Mellman studied my face. Of course you're right, dear. Let's see if we can come up with the fastest way to get you to Juneau. She got her map of Florida and spread it out on the table. The 4 of us put our heads together and studied the map. Love, Teddy. July 12th, 1892. Dear Martha, Daniel said, what about the train? Didn't they say the train was going to go all the way to Miami? Mr. Milkinson said, not yet. As far as I know, it only goes down to Daytona Beach at this point. I said, what about a ship? We're right on the seacoast. Mr. Milkinson said, now that's an idea. Ships leave here daily to go down the coast. Miss Millman said, yes, you can leave in the morning. You can take Gabriel. Once you're there, you'll need some way to travel. A horse would be much faster than traveling on foot. I said, perfect. But do you think they let horses on the boat? Mr. Milkinson said, I don't know why not. I think they take horses and cattle. It's just 1 day sail. You don't even have to spend the night on the ship. Daniel said, and Ethelbert? Miss Melman said, there's always the baby pram. And that made us laugh. And so we agreed that in the morning, Miss Melman and Mr. Milkinson would take Daniel, me, Ethelbert, and Gabriel down to the dock to put us on a boat for Juneau before Mr. Milkinson has to leave town. Miss Melman said, you children go to bed and get some rest. Then I'll do up the dishes. Mr. Milkinson said, I'll help. There aren't too many. Together we'll be done in no time. I lay on the guest bed and tried to sleep. I was tired, but Miss Melman and Mr. Milkinson were talking softly as they did the dishes. I didn't mean to listen, but I could hear them, sort of, if I listened hard enough. Okay, I went to the wall and put my ear next to it, but I had to know what they were saying. Miss Melman said, do you think they'll be all right? Mr. Milkinson said, Casey, they're smart kids. They've made it this far. Teddy's right. If she doesn't get down to the land office soon, this Jimbo Dud might just be able to steal her father's land. He called her Casey. Miss Melman said something I couldn't hear. Then Mr. Milkinson said, I hope so for her sake. But if they're not, then the land should belong to Teddy. Her father worked hard for that land. Miss Melman said something else I couldn't hear. Mr. Milkinson spoke to her gently. We'll do whatever we can to help him. Miss Melman said, thank you, John. You're so kind. He said, good night, dearest. He called her dearest. She said, good night. Then they kissed. I didn't see them kiss, but I think they kissed because there was a silent part, and I don't know what else could have been happening. They kissed. I'm sure of it. I hope they kissed. I'm sure Miss Melman thinks he's the cat's pajamas. Mr. Milkinson's handsome, smart, funny, and nice. He seems crazy about her, and he has a good job, and he kissed her, maybe. But in the middle of the night, when I got up to use the chamber pot, I heard crying. I peeked in Miss Melman's room. Her back was to me, and she was crying into her pillow. I sat on the side of her bed and softly rubbed her back, like Mama used to for me. I said, tears are good. Don't try to stop them. I remember the story Miss Melman had told me under the wagon. I thought about it. After a while, I said, it's the man in the gold locket, isn't it? She nodded. I said, you're thinking what a fine man he was? She nodded. I said, sometimes we just have to let go of things we love. She nodded. I said, I think Mr. Milkinson is a fine man, too. She sat up, wiping her eyes. You do? I nodded, and we both smiled. She said, me, too. We hugged, and I tiptoed back to bed. Love, Teddy. July 13th, 1892. Dear Martha, I wish you were here. All this would be easier if you could be with me too. Before we left, I stroked Girlie's soft brown hide. She was as sweet as ever. I pictured Mama sitting beside her on the stole milking. Oh, Mama, how I miss her. I watched Mr. Milkison hitch Gabriel to the back of the buggy. I pictured Pap sitting on Gabriel, studying the maps and galloping up to the captain. Pap, would I see him again? The thought of it made me want to get on my journey as soon as possible. Mr. Milkison drove us down to the boat dock. He's gone for a while, making inquiries about where to get tickets and which ship will be leaving the dock, so forth. He came back with tickets and drove his buggy down to the steamer Daniel and I'd be sailing on, the Lady Augustine. I could get you as far as Fort Pierce. No one's going further south than that for 3 days. Lots of people, animals, and workers swirled around the dock. Men loaded and unloaded supplies. Mr. Milkison and Daniel led Gabriel up a ramp to the lower deck to the animal stalls. While they were gone, Miss Melman gave me instructions. Here's some extra money for travel, Teddy. Please keep it safe in your neck pouch. Don't let anyone see you take it out. There's enough for a few nights lodging at a boarding house. When you and Daniel get to the courthouse and all is well, please telegraph me to let me know you're safe. Oh, and here's your suitcase with a change of clothing for each of you, and a clean handkerchief. And here's a hamper of food. That should last you all day and evening tonight. I said, thank you, Miss Melman. I'll pay it back, I really will. She said, don't be silly, you already have. Mr. Milkison helped Daniel and me find deck chairs. They were long so we could stretch out our legs and be comfortable. Dogs were allowed, thank goodness, so Ethelbert stretched out between us. The steam whistle blew. The man shouted, all ashore that's going ashore. We waved goodbye to Miss Melman and Mr. Milkison from the chairs. The steamer began to chug. The water around the dock vibrated and danced. Soon the Lady Augustine was underway, moving south along the coast. The figures of Miss Melman and Mr. Milkison grew smaller and smaller until we could no longer see them. The journey had just begun, but Daniel said, let's eat. That boy must be going through a growing spell because he could eat all day long and ask for seconds. We brought out the hamper of food and ate our picnic from the deck chairs. We saw big birds with long yellow beaks with pouches under them. Daniel said, pelicans. One of the pelicans dived in the water and came up a moment later with a full pouch. He opened his mouth and let the water drain out. We saw the fish he had caught flipping its silver body back and forth. But before the pelican could close his mouth again and swallow the fish, a seagull swooped in and stole the fish from his mouth. Daniel said, ha, just like Jimbo Dud. After lunch, we lay in the sunshine and watched the scenery go by. We played checkers and told stories and riddles. I remember we were to dock by sundown, and I wanted to make some sketches before then. While I began a sketch of the pelican and seagull, Daniel went off on his own to explore the steamer. It couldn't have been an hour later that he came back out of breath and looking like he'd seen a ghost. I said, what is it? What's wrong? He said, you won't believe who's on this ship. I said, who? Daniel said, Jimbo Dud. Great buckets of butter beans. It's my worst nightmare. Love, Teddy. July 14th, 1892. Dear Martha, I hated to leave you hanging, but things are so busy. I just write when I can. I couldn't believe my eyes. Jimbo Dud lay on a deck chair in a little alcove asleep. There were no other passengers around. It was a good thing because his loud, snuffly snores could have been heard a mile away. In his one hand, he had a thin bottle of whiskey. His other hand was tucked under his head. Daniel and I tiptoed back so he wouldn't see us if he woke up. I said, that scallywag. Daniel said, what's our plan? I said, I bet he's headed right down where we're going. I bet he's got that land deed with him too. Daniel said, of course he does. We're going to have to get it. I said, while he's asleep? I was filled with dread. Daniel said, the thought of facing Jimbo Dudd asleep is a whole lot better than the thought of facing Jimbo Dudd awake. I said, you're right about that, but we're going to be docking soon. Daniel said, have you got that extra handkerchief Miss Melman gave you? I gave it to him. He said, good. Now you stay back here and let me get that deed. That way, if he wakes up and chases me, you can get away and get help. I said, what are you going to do? Daniel said, I think he's had a few nips of that whiskey. Now stay here till I come back, okay? I agreed. Daniel disappeared into the alcove and I waited. I waited and waited and waited. What was he doing? What could be taking so long? I pictured Jimbo pinning Daniel down, ripping the deed out of his hands. Suddenly, I noticed the sound of the steamer slowing down. We'd be docking soon. I couldn't stand it any longer. I tiptoed back around the alcove and peeked inside. What I saw almost made me jump out of my skin right on the spot. Jimbo was lying on his side. His hands were bound together with one of Daniel's long boot laces. Another lace bound his feet. Daniel had stuffed my handkerchief in Jimbo's mouth and had bound his faded blue bandana around Jimbo's head to hold his mouth shut. Jimbo was wide awake, madder than a hornet. I said, how did you do all this by yourself? My heart was thumping like Sosa's big bass drum. Daniel said, I used my noggin, that's how. He smiled, held up the land deed, and sang, ta-da! Jimbo growled and snarled, but the bandana stayed in place. I looked at his raging face. You can't have Pap's land. Daniel said, let's go. We're about to dock. The loud steam engine revved up and began chugging us in towards the dock. The whistle blew. Daniel and I ran back to our deck chairs, gathered up our stuff, and I slipped the leash on Ethelbert's collar. The dock below was once again swarming with people, and I didn't want Ethel to get lost in the turmoil. Daniel went down to the lower deck to lead Gabriel off. It took a while to get the boat stopped and alongside the dock, get it tied to the pilings, and to lower the gangplank on the ramps. While I was waiting, thoughts of furious Jimbo Dudd getting loose filled my head. Could we get away in time? Would he continue to come after us? But there was Daniel leading Gabriel down the ramp onto the dock. Ethel and I gathered our bundle and joined him. While everyone else was being greeted by friends and family, while workers were unloading trunks and suitcases, while children were laughing and crying, we slipped quietly away. Just as we got to the road, I looked back. My eyes scanned both decks. There were no signs of Jimbo. Love, Teddy. July 15th, 1892. Dear Martha, you ever have a day when something totally unexpected knocks the wind out of you? As Daniel and I rode Gabriel, Ethelbert walked beside us. We needed a place for the night. We found Miss Eileen's boarding house. It looked inviting with twinkly lights and lace curtains. We started to go in, but a thought occurred to me. I said, wait, let's not go there. Daniel said, what are you thinking? I said, Miss Eileen isn't going to take in dogs or horses. Let's find the stables. Daniel said, good idea. If he got loose in time to come ashore, Jimbo might come here. The thought of running into Jimbo Dudd after what Daniel had done to him made me shiver. The stables were run by a kid about our age who had very brown skin and a bright smile. His name was T-Pat. He charged us 50 cents to spend the night. He would have charged us $1, but Daniel and I agreed to pitch out the stall and put down fresh straw. We built it up high, so we would have a soft bed. T-Pat charged us another quarter for Gabriel's food. Daniel took Gabriel's saddle off while I poured a bucket of oats and some fresh water. When Gabriel finished eating, I brushed him with the curry comb I found in the stables. I stroked his soft face. Daniel said, he's a nice horse. Does he belong to your pap? I said, yeah. Daniel, my pap's a good man. I want you to meet him. Daniel said, I want to meet him. He's my kin. I miss my pap. I wish we could all be together. We shared the rest of our hamper of food with T-Pat, and he was glad to get it too. It made me wonder when was the last time he had eaten. We saved 2 apples and 2 ham biscuits for the next day. Daniel and I had a fine night on the hay. Ethelbert scratched and dug and made a nest right next to me. Gabriel slept standing on one side of the stall. During the night, I heard his breathing soft and slow. I heard rats running on the wooden beams overhead and a hoot owl outside somewhere in the tree. Early this morning, Daniel woke me up. Better get a move on. Don't know where Jimbo is or what he might be up to. We worked as quietly as two kids ever worked, saddling Gabriel and leading him out of the stable. I looked behind to make sure we had left nothing, not even a clue, behind. We left town just as the sun was coming up. The smell of the sea blew in on the morning breezes. Ethelbert romped and ran alongside. The rising sun was to our left, so I knew we were headed south. We had the road pretty much to ourselves. Other than the seagulls that rose and swirled overhead, Gabriel seemed more eager and sure-footed after his long night's rest. Just before noon, we stopped by a little brook. The water looked fresh enough, so we drank our fill and wet 2 bandanas for our heads. Ethelbert ran off a little ways, sniffing here and there. All of a sudden, we heard this sharp bark and loud cries. Daniel and I ran to where he was, near a fallen log in some tall brush. We heard the unmistakable sound of rattles, as loud and fierce as an angry swarm of bees. The snake was poised to strike. Ethel was holding him at bay with growls and barks. I screamed, "No, Ethel," but it was too late. The snake's strike was lightning quick. Ethel jumped back, but the snake struck his thigh. He shrieked in shock and pain. Daniel yelled, "Teddy, stay back." I saw that his slingshot was ready to release. He sent a rock flying, quickly reloaded, and fired again. The snake's ugly rattling grew quiet. Ethel lay in the grass, quivering. I gathered him in my arms and wept. "Oh, Martha, you just can't imagine. Love, Teddy." July 16th, 1892. Dear Martha, my letters to you are becoming almost like a diary. I hope that's okay. I want to write things down so I won't ever forget them, and I promise you I'd share every detail. I was telling you about the rattlesnake. Whether Daniel killed the rattlesnake or just stunned it, I don't know, but he picked it up on a stick and carried it far away. He also went to catch Gabriel, who had run away when the rattlesnake struck. I checked Ethelbert's body to see how bad he was injured. There were definitely 2 fang marks on his thigh. I didn't know how to treat a snake bite, so I carried Ethel down to the little brook, put his body in the water. I held him on my lap and massaged his leg down and up toward the 2 punctures. A greenish liquid trickled out into the stream. I knew that would be the poison. I didn't know if I could get it out all the way. But I kept squeezing and massaging over and over, washing the water over the wound. When Daniel got back, he tied Gabriel's reins to a tree. Then he came to the brook. He said, "How bad is it?" I said, "I don't know. There are 2 fang marks. I only saw the 1 bite." Daniel said, "Well, sometimes big snakes don't release all their poison in the first strike." I held Ethel in my arms. He whimpered and lay very still. Daniel said, "We need help. Let's keep going south, Teddy. I can walk. You hold Ethel up on Gabriel." That's what we did. We didn't know what else to do. I felt desperate. As we rode further south, I began to feel sick. My head hurt, my stomach was cramping, and I felt achy and miserable. I had to struggle to hold Ethel onto the horse back with me. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, thought I'd have to tell Daniel to stop, I saw an old man coming toward us. I was sure he was an Indian because of his colorful patchwork clothes. I didn't know if he spoke English or if he'd be friendly or hostile. We must have looked a sight. 1 kid on a horse holding a dog with a snake bite, the other kid leading. Martha, I was so glad to see him. When he got near enough to hear, I called out, "Can you help us?" The Indian man came very close. I tried to explain that our dog had been bit by a snake. I thought I was speaking out loud, but the Indian man didn't seem to hear me. I turned to ask Daniel if he could hear me, and that's the last thing I remember for a long time. I woke up in an open Indian hut. It had a thatched roof and was supported by poles. An Indian woman bathed my forehead with a damp cloth. When she saw my eyes open, she said, "Chihantamo." I tried to sit up, but I was too weak. My stomach was churning, and the Indian woman held my head while I was sick. When I felt better, she held a bowl of water to my mouth. She said, "Okie." I saw that I was lying on a blanket made of raccoon skins. My Indian nurse sang enchanted songs I had never heard before. She crushed some berries and made a tea. The tea was very bitter, and I made a face. She spooned it into my mouth anyway, one spoonful at a time. I knew it was something to help me, so I drank it. I whispered, "Where am I?" and made a curious face. She said, "Chiqui, Chiqui." I wonder what that meant. She pointed around the hut, "Chiqui." The man I had seen on the road came into the hut. His skin was brown and had lots of wrinkles. He said, "Chihantamo." I said, "Where's Daniel?" The Indian man said, "Nagnochi." I said, "Daniel, Nagnochi?" He said, "Nagnochi," and smiled and nodded. We were trying to understand each other. I am relieved. I have no idea where Daniel is, but I feel like he is in good hands. Love, Teddy.